So we have modern systems like 5th edition and Pathfinder and all these various things. But there is a growing organization in the OSR, the old school renaissance, the old school revival, run, whatever it is that you want to call the OSR. It's got a lot of names, but I personally have a large fascination of it because it reflects how the game used to be in its inception, oh, so many years ago, 50, 40 years ago. So, my question for you all is what do you like better, modern systems or OSR? Josiah, go.
Okay, I will tell you straight up, and this is something we've been talking about recently, actually, because for anyone who engages with my content regularly, you'll know my partner, both in content creation and in life, Doxy, she and I do a lot of actual play stuff on the Twitch channel. And something we've talked about lately, she is like a what they call a 5th edition baby. Like she started with 5e, right? And I'm not gonna pretend I wasn't alive in the 80s, so I never got way into AD&D, but I really got into the game with 3rd edition and 3.5. And we were just talking about some of the older systems, and like she wants to experience some of that stuff, right? And just because she had never played any of it before. And I have played a D&D and stuff just to like do it. I've played obviously a ton of 3.5. And I remember saying to her, you don't, or maybe you'd want that, but like I don't want to play AD&D. Okay. And it's not because I think AD&D is a trash tier system. It's because I think it's a horrendously trash tier system. But no, seriously, I don't hate on people who play AD&D, and like if that's what is fun for you, your fun is correct. And I sincerely hope I hope we see the OSR movement grow, because it's really awesome to find a system that you're like, I love this. This is exactly the feel I'm after. So like, yes, play whatever you want. Personally speaking, I don't love a lot of the really old stuff, but I am glad that I've experienced it, because I can draw on those experiences and see what the current edition does right. Like you can look at the obvious like meme stuff like THAC0, haha, armor class was stupid before, and it's like, yeah, no one's advocating to bring back THAC0 and D&D
Well,
5.5.
you say no
But
one. There are some people.
no one, and if you are, you're wrong. But when you look at the way that it handled certain things, like exploration is a big change in how we do exploration now versus how it was done for a really long time. Like when you look at like some of the old hex crawly stuff and that kind of thing, none of that really is built into 5th edition the way it used to be built into some of these old systems. So I think that there's a lot of value, if you haven't played any of these older systems, to at least give it a go, because the worst thing that will happen is you go, wow, that sucked, and then you don't have to do it anymore. But if you play AD&D or 3.5 or any other like old school tabletop game, not even just talking about D&D, even if you don't end up liking it and you find it less fluid than the stuff we have now, there will probably be things about it that you go, huh, that's a really cool idea with how they handled that. And you can either just straight up rip that away and put it in your 5th edition game, or do some version of it, right? Because all these old systems are clearly not useless or unfun or bad, because there's tons of people who still play them every day. We've just gotten a lot more used to the fluidity and design of like modern tabletop games, right? So I would compare it directly to video games. Like I know we play tabletop games to not play video games a lot of the time, but like just because you enjoy playing like brand new games coming out this year doesn't mean that there still might not be part of you or some people who enjoy going back and playing games for like the original Nintendo or like Nintendo 64, right? Like those things are literally inferior in terms of what they're capable of and like what the philosophy of design was at the time, but they're still really great things that you can experience using those systems that they do, that no modern game will be able to capture, because we've just moved so far past it. And like you said, when you were introducing this question, at the very least, it's cool to see how we got where we're at and like where certain things came from. And it's fun to look at like tabletop games that are not D&D and be like, oh, I understand why this exists now, you know? So overall, yeah, I definitely think there's a place for old school games, and I think that everyone should at least dip their toes in it. But I also think there's no shame in being like, that was fun. Now I'm going to play fifth edition, but maybe think about the way that you handle certain things.
Hey, we don't kink shame. We don't edition shame around here. We don't do any of that, okay? Flutes, OSR modern, go.
100%, I gotta go modern, and that's not because I don't like OSR. I actually haven't played a lot of OSR, and so you might say I am not qualified to make this statement. But here's my point of view. When I got into D&D at all, it was through Baldur's Gate 1 and Baldur's Gate 2, the PC games, and those were fun. I liked those a lot. And then I played, I think, 3.5 as a one shot at someone's apartment once, and I just remember I was a monk and I like punched a goblin's face concave sort of thing. And I was like, that was cool. But the reason I say that modern systems are better is because I actually can find friends to play them with. And it's not a lot of work to learn, and to be honest, a lot of people I play with do not put in the work to learn even just how their character works. So I, as the DM, need it to be easy enough that I can help them along. And so from what I understand, a lot of the old systems were more complicated and less accessible. And the growth of 5e has been crazy. And so I have to say, like, from a business standpoint, obviously modern is better. For being able to play, for me in my life, modern is better. My dad plays with me, and he played those old systems too, and he doesn't have complaints about the current system. He enjoys it, and it's accessible. He sometimes says his memory's going. He has a hard time remembering mechanics, and 5th edition's simplicity is a big sell for him to be able to play and not get frustrated. And so for me, just modern is the way to go, because a lot of people I play with, it'd be inaccessible if we played another system. And I've tried playing a few others. Like I tried going to play Pathfinder, the first edition, at a game store for a few weeks, doing their like whatever they call adventures. Like I forget.
Pathfinder Society.
Pathfinder Society. And I didn't enjoy the people there. And so it really just comes down to being able to find people that you enjoy playing with who aren't gonna, like, they didn't care that I was there. It kind of like, Fred, you mentioned in another question about like playing Warhammer, and like it was like competitive and you didn't really have friends, but you'd talk. That's how I felt going to the Pathfinder Society, is like I was just another player at the table for people to play with. I was enabling them to play their character, but I wasn't a potential friend or anything. And obviously it's anecdotal. I know that some people would probably have a counter example. That's just my experience. And so the fact that I've been able to teach like 50 plus people to play 5th edition and still play with them online or in person even today is kind of miraculous in my opinion compared to how other games go. And so and GURPS hated that, by the way. And so yeah, so for me it's modern all the way. And I know people say like you should try other systems and stuff, and it's like I have this opportunity cost. Like I'm the fallacy opportunity cost, where I've put so much time into learning 5th edition, and I find it so malleable for whatever I want it to be, that I'm like, why would I go learn something else just to create more of a time drag on me? I mean, I've got kids, I've got work, I know a system, and I'm not sick of it, so I'm happy in that way.
Ain't nobody got time for that. Fred, modern or OSR?
So I'm a lot older than the rest of you. So I'm 50. Okay, so I started playing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, second ed edition. Frankly, a very hard system to understand. I never used all the rules, and I struggled with it. And we used a combination of mutant stuff. For me, I can see that there are a lot more benefits to 5e to some of the other games that I played, like 3.5, version 3. I played 4e. I played Pathfinder, which is just basically a carbon copy with a few changes to 3.5. And so I've played those games, and I'm actually at this point, for me, I'm actually drawn to OSR, not initially, not the original game that was put out. Because to understand the original game, if you look at the pamphlet and you have to read through it and understand it, it actually gives you a lot more detail. You actually, something like hit points, it explains it really well. But you'd also have to be pretty bright to be able to understand what Gary's communicating to you. Do you know what I mean? It isn't something that your layman can just sort of sit down and like, okay, this is like a textbook. And so the layout of that, the original rule set is really, really tough to get through. So the layout of the book and the content of the material has vastly improved with modern games. That's why 5e is probably being, looked at as being the game, because it was just really well laid out. There are still problems, but they're still really laid out. I've played a lot of older adventures using 5e rules. Do you know what I mean? And I actually find they mesh so well. Like, people say, oh, you got to convert it. Well, rubbish. You really don't. You really don't. You really don't have to do very much at all. I think a lot of people assumed that the rules, and the original rules were like super complicated. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is super complicated because that was the rule system where you had your basic system, and then you had all this other stuff that you could tack on. Nobody used everything. You used whatever you want to use. The things like saving throws never existed. This is actually another rule that exists in Dungeons and Dragons 5e. They never existed before. A lot of the mechanics behind your character never existed. That kind of complexity never existed. They had things called dead levels, where people said, oh, we don't actually get anything when we level up. It's a dead level. Well, you got more hit points, which is actually a pretty big deal, and you got more spells. So you did actually get stuff, but they wanted something else, They wanted another ability. So I'm actually more drawn to OSR. I haven't played any of the rule systems, but I'm very, very keen to that took the very original core rule of, that Gary put out originally and has modified it and made it a bit more modern, a bit easier to read and navigate through. And I think a lot of people are kind of played 5e and they're starting to look in that direction. So I suspect that I will start doing more of that sort of thing eventually. But I live in New Zealand, so getting that stuff is hard, like really hard, It would be like trying to... No, I won't say that because then YouTube will get upset with you, so I won't say that particular thing. But it has to do with D-R-U-G. So it's like that's how hard it is to get. Okay. So yeah, I guess for me it is 5e and older adventures, and I am very much excited about what they're doing with OSR because I think that they will actually wind up being the benchmark. I think whatever they do in 2024, we may actually see something like that, and that we will actually get more of what the game originally was, and then that advanced Dungeons and Dragons feel, which was a whole lot of other rules you tack on to make your game a bit more complicated and build it in whatever way you want to. So yeah. So for those of you who are thinking that everybody here hated on advanced Dungeons and Dragons or basic Dungeons and Dragons, no. I see the benefits, but I totally understand. They were very hard to navigate, and the books, they really were confusing as.
Yeah, turns out you just need a PhD to play AD&D. It's not that hard, people. Come on. For me, OSR versus modern, it's hands down OSR because I prefer low fantasy over high fantasy. I love giving my players henchmen, hirelings, retainers, followers, because in modern games, it's, I'm an awesome guy that goes off on their own. But I think it's way cooler if you turn around and you've got a bevy of people that are like, we're with you, sire. I think that's such a cooler feeling of being in charge of other people. And the reason they're following you is because you're cool. It's not just like, so I really love low fantasy. I love the hireling, henchmen, retainers, followers. I love the old adventures because, my God, there is some fan-freaking-tastic things in the whole alphabet series of the original D&D stuff, which, by the way, is being revisioned, like every single one being revisioned to 5th edition.
Yeah.
So if you want to check those out, I highly suggest you do, because there are some quality gems in there. And other than that, I also love the fact that instead of having a character sheet that's filled with 27 different features and traits and spells and this and that, you got your attack. Go. Make life simple. Boom. That for there definitely draws me to the OSR.
Do you know what I think is really interesting for those of you who feel like there needs to be a divide between the older game and what is now Dungeons and Dragons 5e? There isn't really a divide in many respects, and I'll explain to you why. I was part of the alpha playtest for D&D Next, which is what then became Dungeons and Dragons 5e. Okay, so we had the beta test, and then they closed the doors, and then I got roped into the alpha playtest. Lucky me. And then we wound up testing the monsters in the monster manual, which is why my name's in the damn thing as well. So what you first find out when we were testing it is they gave you some pre-made adventures that we were going to run through to test the rule system and to actually test the monsters. And what were we given to actually test those? We were given the older adventures, basic Dungeons and Dragons. We were literally given the Caves of Chaos. Anybody who knows, that's actually from Keep on the Borderlands. And if you look at Keep on the Borderlands, the original adventure, and then you look at what they gave us during the alpha playtest, and I think they also made it available during the beta test as well. It's almost identical. It is so close to being almost exactly the same. There's so little difference. The only difference is the monster stat blocks. And that is one thing you've got to remember. I played through with my group the Isle of Dread, and I looked at what they gave me and the original adventure, and I was like, oh, I'm going to go back to the original adventure because I don't want to miss anything from the original adventure for whatever Wizards of the Coast has given me for the playtest process. And it was almost identical. There was only one thing missing, a single letter from Barnabas. And that's all I had to pull from the original adventure that they had left out. And I'm like, well, God, what's the deal here? Why did they even bother making a document? Why didn't they just give us the original PDF? Be done with it. So for those of you who think that there is actually a huge divide between basic Dungeons and Dragons and 5e, there really isn't, which means that your OSR, which is very much based on your basic Dungeons and Dragons, is going to line up pretty nicely with 5e. I suspect that a lot of 5e players will transition into OSR very, very, very easily.
For sure. And as mentioned before, not only are a whole bunch of older things being made for new 5e stuff, but a lot of content creators make products now for both involved. They know that they'll make one for an old school essentials, but then they'll have all the stat blocks for 5e and et cetera, et cetera. And that is just a great way to get a catch-all. It's a great way to get more money. And it's also a great way to just reel in more people to the hobby. And I'm so very grateful for 5e for dragging people into this, community, because the OSR gets a little bit of trickle down, and that's perfectly fine by me. So go ahead and tell me down below, what do you prefer, the OSR or modern systems? Which one strikes out well for you? Or do you think that one is not that great? Go ahead and tell me those things, because I would love to hear it down below. That is going to do it for us today. That was an excellent question. I wrote those questions. But more importantly, it was the guest that made it truly special. And I need to transition over to the guest to make sure that I'm totally not conceited. Josiah, go ahead and tell us a bit about yourself. Where can we find you? Tell us what you're doing.
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, TikTok now, because I'm a Zoomer now. That's a new development. Don't tell the other Zoomers that I'm not actually one of them. You can find me in all of those places as Dungeon Dad. If you're on Twitch, the O in Dungeon is a 0 because we're not gonna worry about that. Anyways, you can find me everywhere as Dungeon Dad. If you like monsters and monster lore and all that kind of stuff, that's kind of what my YouTube channel is focused around. We do kind of take old monsters from some of those older systems and convert them into 5th edition. So whether you're using them for OSR stuff or whether you're using them for brand new stuff, you have the option there, along with plot hooks, lore, all that stuff. You can find that.
And you actually had me in an episode earlier. I was the kid under the bench. I saw that.
True. That's true. Yeah, that's true.
Flutes.
So, you
Go on.
No, I was just gonna say you can find Trevor there in that.
No, absolutely.
Bench collab.
Flutes, tell us a bit about yourself. Where can we find you? What are you doing?
Sure. So my wife Opal and I, we maintain flutesloot.com, so you can always find us there if you leave a comment. But most of you are probably on YouTube, and we are now on YouTube as of about a year and a half ago. And so if you want to interact with us there, you can. Those are our two main places we are. We're also on Twitter, on Facebook, but we don't get a lot of activity there because we're not on there a lot. And then
you're not a Zoomer.
I definitely cannot claim to be a Zoomer. No TikTok. And if I also like taking some things from OSR or past editions of D&D. As of recording this, my most recent video and article was about level draining from past editions, and what they kind of look like in 5th edition and how you can make them a little bit more intense to make undead scarier. So definitely not a hater of the old ways, and I like to take inspiration from them. But yeah, you can find us on flutesloot.com or on our YouTube channel, Flutesloot.
And let me tell you, a vampire draining 2 levels in 5th edition, you will see players cry real quick. Fred, go ahead and tell us about yourself, where can we find you and all that good jazz.
Yeah, so yes, my name is Fred Wheeler, and I run the How to D&D YouTube channel. I am on Twitter and Facebook, if people go there. I don't know that the people use Facebook that much, apparently the older generation like myself. And I do have a Twitch TV channel, but I don't really use it because my players insist on doing R-rated stuff, so I just stopped doing that sort of thing. So yeah, I have a Twitch channel, but it just doesn't get used because they're just too naughty, so I can't do stuff with them.
So what you're reiterating is that your players do in fact ruin everything.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I certainly laugh a lot at what they do. But yeah, I cover everything about Dungeons and Dragons. You know, if it's player, if it's Dungeon Master, I don't care. I do the lot. But I can't put my players on TV. It just will not work.
Well, thank you for saving us from that presumable heartbreak, misery, and despair. Alrighty, that is going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you to the lovely patrons who keep this on. And I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.